The crystal chandelier hanging above the grand ballroom of the Grand Hyatt Seoul shimmered like a constellation of captured stars, casting a golden, deceptive glow over the assembly of predators in tuxedos and evening gowns. This was the annual gala of the Golden Dragon, a polite name for the gathering where the city's most ruthless crime lords, corrupt politicians, and shadowy brokers carved up the map of Korea over champagne and beluga caviar. At the center of it all stood Chairman Park Jin-soo. He was a man who wore his arrogance like a second skin, tailored to perfection in a midnight blue tuxedo that cost more than most people earned in a decade. He held a glass of vintage Pinot Noir in one hand and the terrified attention of the room in the other, recounting a story that was equal parts charm and threat. Jin-soo was the head of the Buchan clan, a syndicate that had risen from the gutters of the industrial district to the skyline of Gangnam in less than 5 years. Rumors whispered in the dark corners of the city that he had built his throne on a foundation of betrayal, that he had sold out his own mentor to the police, burned down orphanages to clear land for casinos, and silenced witnesses with a ruthlessness that made even the triads uncomfortable. But tonight, no one dared whisper. Tonight, they only laughed at his jokes and nodded at his proclamations. He was the king of the jungle, and he knew it. He gestured expansively, the wine sloshing dangerously close to the rim of his glass, his voice booming over the polite, fearful murmur of the crowd. Power, he declared, flashing a smile that didn't reach his cold, dead eyes, is not taken. It is earned. It is earned by knowing who to trust, and more importantly, knowing who to crush beneath your heel. The circle of sycophants around him, a mix of nervous assemblymen and junior lieutenants, chuckled appreciatively, raising their glasses in a toast to his brutality. They were desperate to be seen with him, desperate to catch some of the gold dust that seemed to fall from his pockets, but terrified of becoming his next target. Drifting through this sea of sharks was a small, unassuming figure in a black and white uniform. Soo-min kept her head down, her dark hair pulled back into a severe, tight bun that stretched the skin at her temples, making her face look stark and plain. She moved with the invisible efficiency of a ghost, balancing a silver tray laden with fresh flutes of champagne. To the guests, she was part of the furniture, less significant than the velvet drapes or the marble statues lining the walls. She was just the help, a faceless drone hired for minimum wage to clean up their messes and disappear. Jin-soo didn't even glance at her as she approached his circle, deftly replacing an empty glass on a side table. He was too busy mocking a rival boss, a man named Choi, who had recently lost a shipment of contraband to a police raid. He actually cried, Jin-soo sneered, taking a sip of his wine and savoring the humiliation of his enemy. Can you believe it? A grown man, weeping over a few lost crates of electronics. I told him, if you can't handle the loss, you shouldn't be playing the game. Some people are just born to be stepped on. They have the souls of servants. He turned sharply to emphasize his point, his elbow knocking into Soo-min just as she was reaching for a used napkin. The collision was minor, his fault entirely, but the physics of the moment were unforgiving. The red wine sloshed out of his glass, splashing onto the pristine white cuff of his shirt and staining the silk sleeve of his jacket dark purple. The conversation in the immediate vicinity died instantly. The music from the string quartet seemed to falter and stop. Jin-soo looked down at the stain, his face twisting from a charming smile into a mask of incredulous rage. He looked at the wine, then at the maid who stood frozen, clutching her tray against her chest like a shield. You stupid girl, Jin-soo hissed, the charm vanishing instantly to reveal the thug beneath. Do you have any idea what this costs? He didn't wait for an answer. He slapped the tray out of her hands. The sound of shattering crystal was deafening in the sudden silence. Champagne foamed across the polished floor, soaking Soo-min's cheap work shoes. The entire ballroom turned to watch. This was the theater of cruelty Jin-soo enjoyed. It established dominance. It showed everyone that even the smallest mistake would be punished with disproportionate force. Look at me when I speak to you, he roared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. Soo-min slowly raised her head. Her face was plain, devoid of makeup, her eyes cast downward in apparent submission. She trembled slightly, playing the part of the terrified servant to perfection. I am so sorry, Chairman, she stammered, her voice high and breathless, laced with the fear of a woman who needed this job to survive. I didn't mean to, please, forgive me. Forgive you? Jin-soo laughed, a harsh, barking sound that grated on the nerves. He turned to his guests, inviting them to join in the sport. She wants forgiveness. Look at her. Pathetic. This is why some people rule and some people serve. It's in the blood. She's clumsy, stupid, and worthless. He stepped closer, invading her personal space, looming over her with the scent of expensive cologne and malice. He pointed to the mess of glass and wine at his feet. Clean it up, he ordered. On your knees. Use your apron. And when you're done, you can lick the wine off my shoe. It was a humiliation tactic he had used a dozen times before. He expected her to drop to the floor, to weep, to beg for her job. It made him feel powerful, validated his position at the top of the food chain. The crowd watched, some looking away in discomfort, others smirking, glad it wasn't them in the crosshairs. But Soo-min didn't move. She stood amidst the broken glass, her breathing steadying. The trembling stopped. Her posture, previously hunched and submissive, began to straighten. The change was subtle at first, barely noticeable, but then she lifted her chin. She looked Jin-soo directly in the eyes, and the fear was gone. In its place was a look of icy, calculating contempt. A look that belonged to a predator, not prey. I said, clean it up. Jin-soo shouted, confused by her defiance. He reached out to grab her shoulder, to force her down physically. No, she said. The word hung in the air, heavier than the chandelier above. It wasn't whispered. It was spoken with clarity and authority, in a tone that cut through the room like a razor blade. Jin-soo froze, his hand midair. What did you say? He whispered, his face turning a dangerous shade of purple. Soo-min reached up and pulled the pin from her hair. Her dark locks cascaded down her shoulders, framing a face that suddenly looked sharper, harder, more dangerous. She wiped a smudge of wine from her cheek with a slow, deliberate motion, never breaking eye contact. I said no, Park Jin-soo, she repeated, her voice dropping an octave, losing the trembling falsetto of the maid and replacing it with a steely, professional cadence. I think you've made enough of a mess for one lifetime. And frankly, your shoes are cheap fakes, just like your empire. A ripple of shock went through the crowd. Who was this maid? Was she insane? Jin-soo's bodyguards, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, the sudden, suffocating tension, began to push through the crowd toward them. Jin-soo, however, was too stunned to signal them yet. He stared at her, trying to place the face, trying to understand how a servant could look at him with such utter lack of fear. You have a death wish, he growled, his hand drifting toward the inside of his jacket. I'll have you killed before you leave this building. Who do you think you are talking to? I know exactly who I am talking to, Soo-min said, stepping over the broken glass, closing the distance between them until she was inches from his face. I am talking to the man who ordered the arson at the Incheon docks 5 years ago to collect the insurance money. I am talking to the man who launders money through the Crimson Lotus Charity Foundation, taking donations meant for orphans and funneling them into offshore accounts in the Caymans. And I am talking to the man who murdered Detective Kang Min-ho to cover up the smuggling route. The color drained from Jin-soo's face. Those were secrets. Deep secrets. Secrets only his inner circle knew, and half of them were dead. Who are you? He demanded, his voice shaking now, not with rage, but with the creeping tendrils of fear. Soo-min smiled, and it was a terrifying expression. You really don't remember me, do you? You spent so much time looking down on people, you never bothered to memorize the faces of the ones you crushed. You only looked at my father's badge, not the photo on his desk. She reached into the pocket of her apron. The bodyguards drew their weapons, screaming for her to freeze. Gun. Drop it. She didn't pull a gun. She pulled a small, sleek remote control. She held it up for the room to see. "Relax, boys," she called out to the guards, not even looking at them. "It's just the volume control." She pressed a button. Suddenly, the massive screens on the walls of the ballroom, which had been displaying a benign loop of the charity's logo, flickered and changed. The image was grainy, black and white, security footage. It showed a younger Jin-soo standing in a warehouse, holding a gun to the head of a kneeling man. The audio crackled over the ballroom's high-end speakers, cutting through the silence. "Please, Jin-soo. We're partners. Think about your family," the man on the screen begged. "Partners don't exist, Kang. Only ladders," the on-screen Jin-soo sneered, before pulling the trigger. The ballroom erupted into chaos. Screams, gasps, the shattering of more glasses. The guests realizing they were watching a snuff film of their host committing cold-blooded murder. Jin-soo stared at the screen, paralyzed. That tape, he had burned that tape. He had watched the physical cassette melt in an incinerator 10 years ago. How? He spun back to the maid. "Turn it off," he screamed, lunging for the remote. Soo-min sidestepped him effortlessly. She grabbed his outstretched arm, using his own momentum against him. With a fluid, practiced motion, she twisted his wrist, locking his arm behind his back and slamming his face into the buffet table. The table cracked under the impact, sending caviar and ice flying. She pinned him there, holding him down with one hand while addressing the stunned room. "My name is Kang Soo-min," she announced, her voice projecting clearly over the commotion. "Detective Kang was my father. You thought you killed all the witnesses, Jin-soo. But you forgot about his daughter. You forgot about the 12-year-old girl hiding in the ventilation shaft above that warehouse." The bodyguards were closing in now, weapons raised, laser sights dancing on her uniform. "Let him go. Or we shoot," the head of security roared. Soo-min didn't flinch. She pressed the remote again. A loud thud echoed from the main doors of the ballroom. Then another. Then the sound of heavy mechanical locks engaging. Metal shutters slammed down over the windows. The exits were sealing. The guests began to panic, running for the doors, only to find them immovable. "You can't shoot me," Soo-min said calmly to the guards. "Because if you do, the dead man's switch on my phone triggers the release of the unredacted ledger to every news agency in Korea. And to the prosecutor's office." And she looked at the terrified crowd, locking eyes with a few specific men in the back, "to the triad bosses you've been stealing from for the last 3 years. She leaned down to Jin-soo's ear, whispering so only he could hear. "I didn't come here to serve you wine, Jin-soo. I came to serve you up. You wanted to know who to crush. You should have started with me. But now, it's too late. The doors are locked. The signal is jammed. And everyone in this room is now a witness to your confession." Jin-soo struggled, spitting blood onto the tablecloth. "You're trapped in here with us," he snarled, trying to regain some semblance of control. "My men will tear you apart. You can't fight 30 armed guards." "I'm not trapped in here with you," Soo-min said, releasing him and shoving him back toward his guards. She stood alone in the center of the circle, her hands empty, surrounded by enemies, but looking like the only person in control. She ripped off the white apron, revealing a slim, tactical vest underneath her uniform. "You're all trapped in here with me." Story script, Part 2, Continuous Flow. The silence that followed Soo-min's declaration was fragile, a sheet of glass waiting to shatter. For 3 heartbeats, no one moved. The guests were frozen in terror, the guards were hesitant, their fingers hovering over triggers, weighing the threat of the leaked ledger against the wrath of their boss. Jin-soo, wiping the blood from his lip, made the decision for them. He didn't care about the ledger anymore. He didn't care about the triads or the prosecutor. He only cared about erasing the woman who had dared to humiliate him. "Kill her!" Jin-soo screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. "Kill her now. I don't care about the phone. Just kill her." The head of security, a scar-faced brute named Doon, didn't hesitate. He raised his suppressed submachine gun and squeezed the trigger. But Soo-min was already moving. She dropped low, sliding across the polished floor on her knees, kicking the heavy overturned table further onto its side to create a makeshift barricade. Bullets chewed up the wood, sending splinters flying like shrapnel. The ballroom erupted into pandemonium. The guests, realizing the ceasefire was over, screamed and scrambled for cover, overturning chairs and diving beneath the silk-draped round tables. Soo-min didn't stay pinned. She knew that static targets died. She rolled out from behind the table just as a second guard flanked her position. He aimed, but she was faster. She grabbed a discarded champagne bottle from the floor, smashing it against the leg of a chair as she rose, and drove the jagged glass into the gap of his body armor, right between the neck and the shoulder. He gargled and dropped his weapon. Soo-min caught the falling pistol in midair, spun, and fired 2 controlled shots. The first took the guard in the knee. The second shattered the shoulder of Doon, throwing his aim off as he sprayed bullets into the ceiling. "She's armed," Doon roared, clutching his shoulder. Suppressing fire. A wall of lead hammered Soo-min's position. She dove behind a marble pillar, breathing hard. She checked the magazine of the stolen pistol. 12 rounds. Against 29 guards. And she was trapped in a room with 300 civilians. She needed to change the dynamic. She needed chaos. She looked at the remote in her other hand. There was one button left. The entertainment button. She pressed it. The pyrotechnics rigged on the stage for the planned grand finale, the ones meant to launch confetti and sparklers at midnight, detonated early. But Soo-min had hacked the rig earlier that day. Instead of harmless sparks, the canisters exploded with blinding flashbang intensity, and the smoke machines kicked into overdrive, pumping thick, opaque white fog into the room instantly. The ballroom disappeared in a haze of white. Visibility dropped to 0. "I can't see her," a guard shouted. "Hold fire. You'll hit the guests. Fire, you idiots." Jin-soo's voice echoed from somewhere in the fog. "Sweep the room." Soo-min moved through the smoke like the ghost she claimed to be. This was her element. She had grown up studying the blueprints of this hotel, planning this night for a decade. She didn't need to see. She knew exactly where the pillars were, where the guards had been standing. She moved silently, coming up behind a guard who was blindly sweeping his rifle back and forth. She holstered her pistol and wrapped her arm around his throat, choking him out in seconds before lowering him gently to the floor. She took his earpiece and shoved it into her ear. "Sector 4 is blind," a panicked voice crackled in her ear. "We think she's heading for the kitchen exit. Seal the service doors." Doon ordered over the comms. "Trap her in the main hall." Soo-min smiled. That's exactly what she wanted them to do. She wasn't heading for the kitchen yet. She was heading for the VIP table. Specifically, the table where the triad bosses were cowering. She emerged from the smoke like a phantom, grabbing the collar of a man in a gray suit, Chairman Chen, the head of the Golden Triangle supply chain. He yelped, trying to pull away, but Soo-min held him fast. "You saw the video, Chen," she hissed into his ear. "Jin-soo didn't lose your shipment last month. He sold it to the Russians and kept the profit. He's been playing you for a fool." Chen's eyes widened. "That snake," he spat. "He's going to kill everyone in this room to keep that secret," Soo-min said, handing Chen the pistol she had taken from the first guard. "If you want to live, you fight." She vanished back into the smoke before he could answer. Chen looked at the gun, then at the silhouette of Jin-soo screaming orders in the distance. The realization hit him. If Jin-soo won, no witness would leave alive. Chen stood up, racked the slide of the pistol, and shouted in Cantonese to his own bodyguards, who were huddled nearby. "Kill the Buchan traitor." The dynamic shifted instantly. It was no longer 30 guards against one maid. It was a civil war. The triad bodyguards drew their concealed weapons and opened fire on Jin-soo's men. The ballroom became a war zone of muzzle flashes lighting up the smoke like lightning in a storm. Jin-soo's guards were forced to turn their attention away from Soo-min to defend their boss from the furious triads. In the confusion, Soo-min sprinted for the service entrance. Two of Jin-soo's men were guarding it, but they were distracted by the firefight behind them. Soo-min didn't slow down. She leaped, using a serving cart as a springboard, and delivered a flying knee to the jaw of the first guard. As he crumpled, she grabbed his head and slammed it into the second guard's chest. They went down in a tangle of limbs. Soo-min keyed the keypad lock, she had the code memorized, and kicked the double doors open. She burst into the hotel kitchen. It was a labyrinth of stainless steel, steam, and shouting chefs who dropped their pans and ran at the sight of the blood-spattered maid holding a gun. Soo-min didn't stop. She knocked over a rack of heavy copper pots to block the door behind her and kept running. She wasn't escaping, she was leading them. The doors behind her burst open. Jin-soo ran in, followed by Doon and his 5 best killers. Jin-soo's tuxedo was ruined, his face smeared with soot, his eyes wild with the madness of a man whose empire was crumbling. "There," he screamed, pointing at her retreating figure at the far end of the kitchen. Bullets sparked off the stainless steel counters. Soo-min ducked behind a massive industrial stove. She turned the gas valve on a burner to maximum but didn't light it. She waited. The footsteps were getting closer. They were moving in a tactical formation, sweeping the room. "Come out, Soo-min," Jin-soo taunted, his voice echoing off the tile walls. "You think you can run? I own this city. I own the police. Even if you get out, you're dead. Give me the phone, and I'll make it quick." "You don't own anything anymore," Soo-min called out, her voice calm. "The triads are tearing your men apart in the ballroom. The police are 10 minutes away. And you? You're chasing a ghost into a graveyard. Flank her." Doon signaled. 2 guards moved around the left side of the stove. Soo-min waited until they were right next to the open gas valve. She grabbed a metal ladle from the counter, pulled the pin on a flashbang grenade she had swiped from Doon's belt during the scuffle in the ballroom. She had pickpocketed him when she shot his shoulder, and tossed it. But she didn't toss it at them. She tossed it at the gas cloud hovering over the stove. Whoosh! A fireball erupted, engulfing the 2 guards. They screamed, batting at the flames as the concussion knocked them backward. The kitchen sprinklers triggered instantly, raining water down and turning the room into a sauna of steam and smoke. Soo-min used the distraction to vault over the prep table. She landed in front of the walk-in freezer. Jin-soo fired wildly through the steam, but she was already moving into the freezer corridor. After her, he shrieked. "She's cornered. There's no exit that way." He was right. The freezer corridor was a dead end. It led only to the cold storage units and the garbage disposal chute. Jin-soo and his remaining 3 men sprinted down the hallway, splashing through the water. They reached the end of the corridor. Soo-min was standing with her back to the heavy steel door of the meat locker. She had nowhere to go. Jin-soo slowed down, panting, a cruel smile returning to his face. He leveled his gun at her chest. Doon stood beside him, clutching his bleeding shoulder, his weapon raised. "End of the line, Maid," Jin-soo sneered. "Any last clever words? Any more videos to play?" Soo-min looked at them. She looked tired, bruised, and out of breath. But she wasn't scared. She looked at the digital thermometer on the wall next to her. "Actually," she said, "I do have one question. Do you know the freezing point of the human body?" Jin-soo frowned. "What?" Soo-min slammed her hand onto the red emergency button on the wall. But it wasn't the alarm. It was the lockdown, engage for the freezer unit, a safety protocol she had rewired hours ago. The heavy steel door behind her didn't open. Instead, a secondary blast door slammed down from the ceiling behind Jin-soo and his men, sealing the corridor. They were trapped in the hallway with her. You locked us in? Jin-soo laughed incredulously. You locked yourself in with 3 armed men. You're dumber than I thought. I'm not locked in with you, Soo-min said, reaching for the handle of the meat locker door behind her. I have the key card. She swiped a card. The door behind her beeped and opened. She stepped backward into the freezing air of the meat locker. Shoot her! Jin-soo screamed. They fired, but the heavy insulated door slammed shut with a definitive thud before the bullets could reach her. The electronic lock engaged. Soo-min was safe inside the freezer. Jin-soo and his men were trapped in the corridor outside. So what? Do-eun spat, reloading his weapon. We blow the door. Or we wait for the override. Boss, one of the guards said, his voice trembling. Look at the vents. Jin-soo looked up. The ventilation system in the corridor rumbled to life. But it wasn't blowing air. It was sucking it out. And pumping in something else. A thick, white fog that smelled of chemicals. Liquid nitrogen coolant, Jin-soo realized, horror dawning on him. She rigged the exchange system. She's freezing us out, Do-eun yelled, firing his gun at the blast door behind them. The bullets sparked harmlessly off the reinforced steel. The temperature in the corridor began to drop rapidly. The water on the floor from the sprinklers started to crystallize into ice. Inside the meat locker, Soo-min watched them on a small security monitor mounted on the wall. She pulled a thick parka from a hook, one she had planted there earlier, and put it on. She picked up a heavy fire axe from the emergency case. She wasn't going to wait for them to freeze. That was too easy. She needed Jin-soo to answer for his crimes. She needed him to confess to the location of her father's body, which he had never revealed. She walked to the back of the freezer, where the garbage chute was located. She wasn't escaping. She was circling back. The chute led to the sub-basement. From there, she could cut the power to the blast door, open it, and finish this on her terms. Don't die yet, Jin-soo, she whispered to the monitor, watching him shivering as he pounded on the steel walls. We have unfinished business. She slid down the chute, landing in a pile of laundry bags in the sub-basement. She checked her phone. The police scanners were going crazy. The SWAT team was breaching the lobby. The triads had secured the ballroom. Jin-soo was isolated. But she knew him. A rat always had a hole. He wouldn't just freeze. He would have a contingency. And sure enough, as she moved toward the maintenance elevator, the building shook. An explosion. A small, directed blast. He blew the hinges, Soo-min muttered, breaking into a run. Jin-soo had used his own C4, probably carried by Do-eun, to breach the blast door. He was loose in the hotel again. But he was hurt, he was cold, and he was desperate. Soo-min ran for the elevator, but she stopped. The elevator was moving. Someone had called it to the roof. The helipad, she realized. He has a chopper coming. She looked at the stairwell door. 30 flights of stairs. She wouldn't make it in time. She looked at the service elevator shaft. The car was descending. She pried the doors open with the axe and looked up at the cables. Going up, she gritted out. She jumped, grabbing the greasy steel cable of the counterweight. As the elevator car went down, the counterweight went up, pulling her with it. She flew upward through the darkness of the shaft, the wind roaring in her ears. It was a dangerous, suicidal ride, but it was the only way to beat him to the roof. She reached the top floor, swinging off the cable onto the maintenance ladder just before the counterweight slammed into the pulleys. She kicked open the roof access door and stepped out into the night. The wind was howling up here. Rain lashed the helipad. And there, standing by the edge, waiting for the sound of rotors, was Jin-soo. He was alone. Do-eun and the others must have been left behind or killed in the blast. He held a briefcase in one hand and a gun in the other. He looked like a drowned rat, shivering, bleeding, stripped of all his arrogance. He turned and saw her. He didn't look surprised. He looked resigned. "You just won't die," he shouted over the wind. "Neither will the truth," Soo-min shouted back, raising her pistol. "Where is he, Jin-soo? Where did you bury my father?" Jin-soo laughed, a manic, broken sound. He stepped closer to the edge. "You want to know? You destroyed my life, my reputation, my empire, and you think I'm going to give you closure?" He pointed the gun at her. "I'm leaving, Soo-min. And you're going to watch me fly away." In the distance, the thrum of a helicopter approached. It was black, unmarked. His escape. "You're not getting on that chopper," Soo-min said, taking a step forward. "Try and stop me," Jin-soo snarled. He raised his gun to fire. Soo-min didn't fire. She dropped her gun. Jin-soo blinked, confused. "Giving up?" "No," Soo-min said, pulling a baton from her belt and snapping it open. "I'm just done shooting. I want to feel you break." She charged. The wind on the roof was a physical force, screaming over the edge of the skyscraper like a banshee. Rain hammered down in sheets, soaking Soo-min and Jin-soo to the bone instantly. Jin-soo fired his last round as Soo-min closed the distance, the bullet sparking off the metal vent she used for cover. Before he could re-aim, she was on him. She swung the baton with the force of a decade of suppressed rage. It connected with his wrist, a sickening crack echoing over the storm. Jin-soo screamed, dropping his gun. It skittered across the wet concrete and vanished over the edge of the building. He was unarmed now, but desperation made him dangerous. He pulled a concealed knife from his ankle holster and slashed wildly. Soo-min ducked under the blade, the steel whistling inches from her ear. She swept his legs, but he anticipated the move, jumping back and kicking her in the chest. She stumbled, sliding on the slick surface. Jin-soo didn't wait. He lunged, driving the knife down toward her throat. She caught his wrist with both hands, the tip of the blade shivering inches from her jugular. "You're just a servant." Jin-soo roared, his face twisted into a mask of pure hatred, spit and rain flying from his lips. "You exist to serve me. You should have stayed in the kitchen." "I don't serve trash," Soo-min gritted out. She twisted her hips, bucking him off. He rolled, scrambling to his feet, but she was faster. She delivered a spinning kick to his solar plexus, doubling him over. Then, she brought the baton down on his shoulder, the same shoulder Doon had been shot in earlier. Jin-soo collapsed to his knees, dropping the knife, howling in agony. The black helicopter roared overhead, its searchlight blinding them both. The rotor wash whipped up a mini tornado of water and debris. A rope ladder dropped, dangling just out of reach. Jin-soo looked up, salvation within his grasp. He clawed his way toward the ladder, dragging his broken body across the roof. "Wait," he screamed at the pilot. "Get me out of here." Soo-min stood up, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. She could stop him. She could tackle him before he reached the ladder. But she didn't. She just watched. Jin-soo grabbed the bottom rung of the ladder. He laughed, a hysterical, triumphant sound. "You missed," he yelled back at her. "I win. I always win." He started to climb. But then, the helicopter shifted. The pilot, looking down, saw something Jin-soo didn't. The roof access door burst open. A dozen SWAT officers poured onto the helipad, weapons trained on the aircraft. The pilot, realizing he was flying into a federal trap, made a cold calculation. He wasn't going to prison for a washed-up crime lord. The helicopter banked sharply to the right. The ladder swung wildly. "No!" Jin-soo screamed. "Don't leave me." The pilot cut the line. The rope ladder detached from the winch. Jin-soo fell 15 feet, slamming back onto the hard concrete of the roof. He lay there, stunned, broken, staring up as the helicopter peeled away into the storm, abandoning him to his fate. Soo-min walked over to him. He was trying to crawl away, whimpering, all the fight drained out of him. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with terror. He wasn't the chairman anymore. He was just a pathetic, small man in a ruined tuxedo. "It's over, Jin-soo," Soo-min said, her voice cutting through the wind. "No one is coming for you. No one is left to pay off the cops. Your accounts are frozen. Your men are in cuffs. You have nothing." Jin-soo coughed, blood bubbling on his lips. I have the body," he wheezed. "Your father. You want to know where he is? I'm the only one who knows. If I go to prison, I take the secret to my grave." Soo-min knelt beside him. She grabbed him by the lapels, pulling him close. "Where is he?" "Make a deal," Jin-soo sneered, trying to summon one last shred of leverage. "Get me a lawyer. Get me immunity. And maybe I'll tell you which pillar he's buried under." Soo-min stared at him. The temptation was overwhelming. To give him what he wanted just to bring her father home. To let the monster survive so the ghost could rest. But then she remembered her father's voice on the tape. "Partners don't exist, Jin-soo. Only ladders." Her father hadn't begged for his life. He had tried to reason with a man who had no soul. "My father wouldn't want me to make a deal with the devil," Soo-min whispered. She stood up. She looked at the SWAT team closing in. Then she looked back at Jin-soo. "You think you're the only one who knows? You think I spent 10 years just learning how to pour wine?" She pulled her phone from her pocket. She tapped the screen and held it up to his face. It was a schematic. A construction blueprint of the hotel foundation, dated 10 years ago. A single area in the sub-basement concrete pour was highlighted in red. "I found the contractor you paid off, Jin-soo," she said coldly. "He's in witness protection in Busan. He talked 3 days ago. I didn't need you to tell me where the body is. I just needed you to admit you killed him so I could record it." She tapped her chest. Under the torn uniform, a small red light blinked. A body cam. You knew?" Jin-soo whispered, his eyes widening in horror. "You played me?" "I served you," Soo-min corrected. "I served you exactly what you deserved." The SWAT team reached them. "Hands behind your back," an officer shouted, hauling Jin-soo up. They cuffed him roughly. As they dragged him away, he looked back at Soo-min one last time. He didn't look angry anymore. He looked empty. A hollow shell of a king whose kingdom had been a lie. Soo-min watched him disappear into the stairwell. The rain was slowing down, the storm breaking. In the distance, the sun was beginning to rise over the Han River, painting the sky in hues of purple and gold. "Ma'am?" A police captain approached her cautiously. "Are you okay? We have a medic downstairs." Soo-min looked at her hands. They were shaking, the adrenaline finally crashing. She took a deep breath of the cold, clean morning air. She reached up and touched the pin in her hair, pulling the rest of it loose. The tight bun, the uniform, the invisible servant, she was shedding the skin she had worn for so long. "I'm fine, Captain," she said, her voice steady. "I'm just ready to go home." 2 weeks later. The cemetery was quiet, the autumn leaves drifting down to cover the rows of gray headstones. Soo-min stood in front of a fresh grave. The tombstone was simple marble, engraved with a single name, Detective Kang Min-ho. Beloved father. Hero. She placed a bouquet of white chrysanthemums on the cold stone. She wasn't wearing a uniform anymore. She wore a sharp navy blazer and jeans, looking like the woman she was meant to be before the world forced her into the shadows. "I found him, Dad," she whispered to the wind. "I brought him home. And the man who did it, he's never going to hurt anyone again. He's going to rot in a cell the size of a pantry." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small silver pin, the golden dragon lapel pin she had taken from Jin-soo's office the night she started working there. It was the symbol of his power. She dropped it onto the dirt and crushed it into the mud with her heel. Soo-min? She turned. Prosecutor Kim stood on the path, holding a file. He looked tired but satisfied. The judge denied bail. Jin-soo is looking at 3 consecutive life sentences. The triads are testifying against him to cut their own deals. It's over. It's over, Soo-min repeated, testing the words. They felt strange. Heavy, but good. So, Kim said, leaning against a tree. What now? The agency that trained you, they want you back. They said a talent like yours is wasted in retirement. Soo-min looked at the grave, then at the city skyline in the distance. She thought about the thrill of the heist, the precision of the plan, the feeling of taking down a monster who thought he was untouchable. I'm not going back to the agency, she said. Oh. Kim raised an eyebrow. Going to open a bakery? Soo-min smiled. It was the same dangerous, confident smile she had worn in the ballroom. No. I was thinking, there are a lot of other chairmans in this city. A lot of people who think they can step on the weak because no one is watching. She walked past Kim, heading toward the exit. She stopped and looked back over her shoulder. I think I'm going to start my own cleaning service, she said. We specialize in taking out the trash. Kim laughed, shaking his head. If you need a lawyer, you know where to find me. I won't need a lawyer, Soo-min said, walking away into the sunlight. I never leave a mess. Soo-min waited 10 years for that moment on the roof. Do you think she should have taken the deal to find her father sooner, or was she right to trust her plan until the end? And would you hire her cleaning service? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching. Do remember to hit the subscribe button, like and share this story, and I'll see you in the next one.